It was almost 7 years ago that I made this video, my top 5 comics for kids. In that, I named Owly, written and drawn by Andy Rundon, Uncle Scrooge, written and drawn by both Karl Barks and Don Rosa, Zeta the Space Girl, written and drawn by Ben Hutke, Hilda, written and drawn by Luke Pearson, and of course Born, written and drawn by Jeff Smith, as my top 5 comics for kids. And because of course any lists or top 10s and 5s are completely arbitrary, I also tacked on a whole bunch of honorable mentions, including Mouse Guard by David Peterson, Ghosts by Raina Telgemeier, which was really standing in for all of Raina's books, including Smile, Sisters, and Drama. And in the years since that video, I've also mentioned a number of young readers or children's comics on this channel, usually interspersed into my sci-fi or fantasy lists, as well as spotlight videos like the one on Home Time by Campbell White and Superman Smashes the Clan by Jean Luen Yang and Guru Hiru. I've often talked about how much I enjoyed Meanwhile and other comics of Jason Shiga, specifically for younger readers. And then there are perennial favorites like the Tintin and Asterix adventures, my anthropomorphic animal favorites from Usagi Yojimbo to Beasts of Burden, and many, many more. But there still has been felt the need by viewers and by myself for another specifically young readers comics video. So in this episode of For the Love of Comics, I'll be talking about 10 more terrific comics for kids with a particular point of view. Not only do I think that these comics are extremely enjoyable by kids, I also think that they're terrific comics. That is to say, books that use the comics medium to their true potential. And maybe because of that, these are also books that any grown-up or adult can enjoy as well. Just like in my previous video, I'm not ranking these, but I will order them from youngest to oldest readers, taking as a very rough guideline the recommended reading ages, although to be perfectly honest, I find those sort of nebulous at the best of times, but we can broadly say is going from younger to older readers. Enough with the introduction and the caveats, let's jump into 10 more terrific comics for kids that grown-ups will also love. The first couple of books on my list are going to court a little controversy by the benign standards of this channel. The first book is The Snowman, written and drawn by Raymond Briggs. I've talked about Raymond Briggs in a spotlight video, but in that video I focused on 4 books, 3 of which are ostensibly for mature readers, with Father Christmas being the only exception. The Snowman, of course, is Raymond Briggs' perhaps most famous work, a gorgeous and timeless holiday classic. First published in 1979, The Snowman is a completely wordless comic which, coupled with its gorgeous color pencil art, lends a fairy tale pantomime quality to the story. It tells the story of one magical night in which a snowman comes alive and a little boy and he travel and have these wondrous adventures all before the next morning, and the tale of this night achieves an ethereal quality in this book. The reason I said this might be controversial is because The Snowman might be considered by many people to be an illustrated children's book and not a comic, but I think it would be fairly obvious to any of us that this is a very slim graphic novel, first published incidentally in the same year as Will Eisner's A Contract with God. A gorgeous masterpiece that has birthed, I think, an ocean of merchandise and other media, much like Moomin, another classic comic that I've talked about on this channel. But this original book, more than anything that has come after it, including the Raymond Briggs pen sequel, is an utterly unique work that both stands alone and serves as a wonderful introduction to the great works of Raymond Briggs. If The Snowman was controversial for me to label as a comic, which it shouldn't be, the next one is really going to ruffle some feathers. This is Wait by Antoinette Portes, an award-winning book by an award-winning writer and artist. Once again, this might be, maybe more justifiably than The Snowman, might be argued that this is an illustrated children's book. But once again, I don't see why it can't be both. Although featuring large one-page illustrations, this is a terrific story that is all about the sequence and the juxtaposition. Where The Snowman was completely textless, Wait has a grand total of 2 words, well, technically 3. A mother and a child are trying to get home. The mother says hurry and the child says wait. Over and over again, we're given a large scenario in which the mother says hurry and a small zoomed in detail which makes the child say wait. The rhythm that's created by this places equal emphasis on the gorgeous illustrations and the simple juxtaposition of these words until until we reach a crescendo at the end, which I find to be one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. Just 2 words bring such emotional weight that an adult may be even more moved than a child would be. Wait is a book that in a couple of dozen pages becomes something that you can return to over and over again. Elegant and minimal and simple in some ways, but deeply beautiful and affecting. I'm all about including Wait in the pantheon of great comics. The next book or books on my list I do not actually own physical copies of, and that's because I've gifted them all to my nephew who really loves them. These are the Blueberry and Pancakes books by Dan Abdo and Jason Patterson, going on these books as Dan and Jason. Blueberry and Pancakes tell the misadventures of 3 friends, the eponymous Blueberry and Pancakes, and the shenanigans that they get up to and the trouble that they find themselves in, usually created by their own character flaws, and it's the bond and the friendship between them that's tested and eventually ends up solving these problems. Not only are these comics high energy fun, the closest things to screwball comedies I've seen in children's comics without it being grating, but they're also wonderfully designed with the panel structures, insets, and movement from page to page, zipping along in a way that not most children's comics are able to do. While the colorful art and the colorful characters will appeal to kids, it is the craft of the storytelling and the use of the comics medium that I think adults will respond to the most. I would actually love to own copies of these little hardcovers myself, and Dan and Jason, the authors, have another series, Bob the Berserker, which I was also able to get my nephew in a box set. But even if I don't own them, they've created such an impression on me that I would be remiss not to have them on this list. Blueberry and Pancakes is published by First Second, a publisher that showed up on my previous list, has dominated one of my shelf videos, and will show up yet again further down this list. But my next 2 picks are from the worlds of Marvel and DC, publishers that I know have made concerted efforts to also capture a young reader's market using their properties. In some ways, one could assume that the superhero genre should have always been an all-ages genre, but we know that's not necessarily the case. There have been a number of wonderful titles. 2 of my absolute favorites are Franklin Richards, Son of a Genius, written and drawn by Chris Eliopoulos and a couple of others, including Mark Sumerak, and Shazam, The Monster Society of Evil, written and drawn by Jeff Smith. Franklin Richards is a collection of short pieces that were published in a variety of places and then collected together in trades, most conveniently the Ultimate Collections over here. And these tell short little funny stories about Reed and Sue Richards' son. The conceit over here most closely matches Calvin and Hobbes, with Franklin playing the Calvin sort of role and Herbie, the robot, who I remember from a TV cartoon show. But over here, he has a role of a put-upon babysitter, exasperated at the hijinks that our hero gets into. Everything in Reed Richards' laboratory or in the Baxter building is fair game to this kid. But once again, just like Blueberry and Pancakes, each story wraps itself up in a warm, fuzzy blanket, but completely based on hijinks comedy. Much like The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, Franklin Richards is extremely accessible to people who have no idea about the larger Marvel superhero universe, but is also packed full of jokes and nods and asides that longtime fans and aficionados will get a real kick out of. If you're a Marvel superhero nerd, I can't think of anything better to read with your kids. Shazam, The Monster Society of Evil is brought to you by Jeff Smith, the mind behind Bone. This is a single long story which serves as a sort of origin story. The story of a young, homeless kid, Billy Batson, who awakens a great power and becomes host to the superhero Captain Marvel. A story that is classic and familiar to some people is given a polish and sheen that makes it feel contemporary while maintaining its classic roots. So much time is given to the magical whimsy of childhood and of the children's interactions with each other, but it's also a story that recognizes the darker and sadder parts of life. They never become overwhelming though. You do get a happy ending, but it seems so deserved and so crowd-pleasing, working as it does with the characters so beautifully established. It should be no surprise that Jeff Smith is able to create great comics, but working with the licensed property and within this world and still doing something that is so faithful yet original. I'd go so far as to say The Monster Society of Evil is not just a great kids comic, but one of the best single-volume DC comics I've ever read. Next up on my list is New Kid, written and drawn by Jerry Craft. Although I've read most of these comics more than once, New Kid is the most recent of my reads, only a couple of years since I first read it. I confess that when I first flipped through it, I found the art style maybe a little too simple for my tastes. But I think I made the classic mistake of judging a comic from one or two images rather than how the story flows together. New Kid is a lovely, complex work that sort of disguises its complexity, presenting a very honest portrayal of a black kid moving to a new school, one that is mainly white and very affluent. You'd think it'd be very overt in the kind of issues that it wants to talk about. But instead, New Kid gives us such particular individual characters that every situation and question that comes up in the story is not framed only as a social one, but one that has repercussions and effects on individual people. The generosity and empathy towards all characters, as well as the more simple and very humor-tinged approach to some very difficult situations in life, are what make New Kid such a lovely read and such a non-condescending read. Never talking down to the reader while doing its illuminating, I found New Kid to be refreshing and surprising, and an object lesson for me personally in not dismissing something too early. New Kid does have a couple of sequels that I've not yet read, but I have it on good authority that they're also very good. The last 4 books are all originally published by FtLoC, although a couple of them may have since been reprinted by other publishers. First up, This Was Our Pact, written and drawn by Ryan Andrews. A gentle, beautiful, magical coming-of-age story set over a very short period of time that makes it feel endless. Many children's books deal with magic and fantasy, but it's also very difficult for them to truly convey that in a way that would even work for an adult. This Was Our Pact achieves this by having only the faintest sprinklings of magic, and instead being about the anticipation and the things around that, the beliefs and the people who believe and don't believe, and the strangest places we find common ground. With beautiful illustrations and heartfelt writing, This Was Our Pact comes into that pantheon of coming-of-age stories where one time in your life is ending and you're moving on to another. It comes into that pantheon with a very unique voice and story. And keeping with the coming-of-age theme, This One Summer by Jillian and Mariko Tamaki. This One Summer is an award-winning book of 2 girls, best friends, who meet every summer, and then one particular summer in which the world sort of falls apart, but also begins anew for them. With coming-of-age stories, it's a little difficult to think of whether they would appeal to younger readers or really only appeal to adults looking back at their own childhoods. But This One Summer's focus on the confusion and the communication between these friends makes it something that I think that younger readers could also relate to. This feels not just like nostalgia, a document of a bygone time, but also a document of how difficult life can be and how confusing it can be, and how dealing with it might just be a question of taking it step by step. This One Summer is an acknowledged classic in the comics medium, and it's because of the honesty and the affirmation it displays that makes it such a resonant work for teenagers as well as adults. Next up, Dragon Hoops by Jean Luen Yang. Now, Jean Luen Yang is one of my favorites. I've mentioned his American-born Chinese in my top 10 gateway comics, Superman Smashes the Clan, as I mentioned before, and in a number of shelf videos and live streams. He's done everything from education to Superboy, but Dragon Hoops is the first book of his that I've read, which is essentially an autobiography, although he's not the star of the story. This is the story of a high school basketball team and Jean Luen Yang, who's a teacher in the school's interactions and involvement with this team. Unlike many sports underdog stories, this is about a team that's really good and has a lot of pressure on them to perform. That doesn't keep the traditional sports tension of this diffused at all. In fact, Dragon Hoops plays out very similarly to a Hollywood TV show or movie. But what sets it apart, again, like most of these books, is its attention to detail, its empathy for a wide, broad cast of characters, and a pretty honest look at the lives of these children and the parents and adults who surround them. Dragon Hoops is a sports drama, but like the best sports drama, it's about the athletes themselves, what they have to overcome within them as well as outside of them. It looks like a big, hefty book, but it's so engaging and so warm that the pages will just fly by. And the final book on this list, also related to sports, Also at the end of high school, this is Spinning by Tillie Walden. Spinning is Tillie Walden's autobiographical account of being in competitive figure skating while she was in school. And over the course of the many months that this story encompasses, we're given a full glimpse of this life. The early mornings, the empty, dark institutional spaces, the nervous excitement, all of these things achieve a power that's incredible and very hard to describe. Spinning puts you into the shoes and the skin of this person who is undergoing this change, of realizing that what has been important to them for so long and what has been such a big part of them for so long may no longer have a place in their world, that they are changing, they're moving on, and there are some things that no longer fit, will have to be left behind. The joy and the sadness in that kind of realization are almost equal, and it's that difficult, ephemeral feeling that this book nails so beautifully. It's an absolute masterpiece which has, like all of these do, my highest recommendation. Now, irrespective of what one puts in a YouTube thumbnail, there is no way to call out 10 best comics of any kind. But these 10 books do, as I said, represent to me the heights that the medium can reach, as well as narratives that can engage across any age group. In the comments below, please leave any recommendations and suggestions you have for me as well as other viewers of great young readers comics. I think I'll keep making videos like this and adding to this list over time. Thanks to my patrons and YouTube members who directly contribute to making these videos, and thank you all for watching. This has been For the Love of Comics, and I'll see you at the next video.